Tyler in the WIS-TV Traffic Center taking one last look at your traffic around the Midlands for your ride in on this Monday morning. Things looking pretty clear for the most part. Do have one area obstruction in the roadway. It's going to be I-26 eastbound right there at exit number 110. Other than that, everything looking pretty calm. One more actually look here. Going to take a look at things on the north side. Accident at I-26 eastbound at exit number 91. Other than that, everything's good for the morning. Let you ride in on that early game. Nine o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Oh boy, what a weekend. I make this joke all the time that sometimes there's days or nights before coming in here to do shows where I seriously wonder, man, what are we going to be able to talk about for 2, 3, 4, however many hours we got to cover over the course of the next day. I didn't have to worry about that too much yesterday when it came to prepping for today. Because, oh my goodness, what a weekend across all sports for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Of course, the one that is going to garner all the attention is what went down up the road in Greenville at the Bon Scores Wellness Arena at the SEC Women's Tournament. Good things and bad things took place this past weekend for the Gamecocks. We'll start off with the good. Of course, the biggest news being that the South Carolina women claimed yet another SEC Women's Tournament crown, the 8th in 10 years, and garnering a lot of momentum going into the upcoming NCAA Women's Tournament in a little over a week's time. And it's just yet another feather in the cap for Dawn Staley and what she's been able to do in her time as a head coach here at South Carolina. Another SEC regular season crown, another tournament crown, going in as a number one seed yet again to the NCAA tournament, where South Carolina is going to be expected, of course, to be the favorite for the national championship, and should be able to make it through those first couple rounds fairly routinely. And then obviously you get into the tougher competition as you get into the Elite Eights, the Final Fours, and of course the the national championship game itself. So from that standpoint, obviously a great weekend, as we expected it to be. A little bit close for comfort in all of the games that South Carolina played, and we'll dive into plenty of that as the day and the morning go along. But of course, the one thing that everybody is talking about, not just around here, but around the sports world, is the incident that occurred yesterday between South Carolina and LSU.
Okay, we have an intentional foul on LSU number 4, which stopped the play. We have a DQ fighting penalty on number 10 for South Carolina. We have players from both benches coming coming onto the court but not participating. All those players will be ejected. So we will finish the game with 5-on-5. Play will resume with the intentional foul to anybody on South Carolina shooting the ball. Then we will go to the DQ for LSU. Anybody shooting those 2 free throws, and the ball will be put in play at the division line for LSU.
That was the head official yesterday afternoon at the SEC Women's Tournament Championship game, reading off the laundry list of things after the incident, the melee, the fracas, whatever you want to call it, occurred between South Carolina and LSU. Of course, that was all sparked when Flajee Johnson of LSU grabbed hold of Lynch Fulwiley drew the intentional foul. Ashlyn Watkins took favor to that, came over there jawing a little bit, and Flau'jae Johnson shoves her, and Camila Cardoso comes in from the other side and shoves Flau'jae Johnson a little bit harder, and she ends up going to the ground, and then, well, of course, all hell breaks loose. Flau'jae Johnson's brother's coming out of the stands. It was just a mess of a situation. I think the total delay time was like 20 minutes. It's certainly not what you were expecting or hoping to see in that kind of game. And before diving into all the specifics of everything that occurred and went down with this, the biggest and the most unfortunate thing is that this ends up overshadowing what was a really, really great game between two of, the best teams in the entire country. And this was a highly anticipated matchup. Of course, anytime South Carolina and LSU get together, it's going to garner a lot of attention. They have the game day crew out there once again, similar to how they were for the game in Baton Rouge back at the end of January. You, of course, have the last two national champions, two Hall of Fame head coaches in Dawn Staley and Kim Mulkey. So a lot of eyes end up, being on this game. And unfortunately, this is what is going to be talked about more than the actual game itself, which was great up to that point. And, a nip and tuck game all the way down to the end. That occurred with just over 2 minutes left, 2 minutes left in the game. And South Carolina was obviously able to hold on for the 79-72 win. But this, again, is going to end up kind of, casting a shadow over, again, what was it was a very good game between, again, two of the best teams in the country, certainly the two best teams in the, in the SEC. It leads to Camila Cardoso getting disqualified because she did shove Flau'jae Johnson to the ground, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm surprised by it. By the letter of the law, that's typically what is going to end up happening, and as a result, now I know in watching the game on television, there was a lot of confusion on what the fallout of this was going to be, because they initially said they had ejected everybody with the exception of the starting five, or the five girls that were on the floor for for each team, and then they had to go back and review, which is why the delay took so long, obviously. But they go back and reviewed that Tina Pau was sitting at the scorer's table, minding her own business, and, wasn't necessarily caught up in what was going on. And then Sanaya Fagan had not left the bench area for South Carolina, so she was allowed to stay in as well. So South Carolina was able to end the game with 6 players eligible. LSU was only able to end with 5 players eligible because the rule, and it's a pretty clear line in the sand, that if you leave the bench area when something like that's going on, you are ejected. You can't finish the game or anything like that. So that got most of the girls on, both sides for South Carolina and LSU. Now, with Camila Cardoso getting disqualified from the game for fighting, which is how they phrase it, that also means that she's not going to be able to play in the, first round of the NCAA tournament as well, which, look, South Carolina's played without Camila Cardoso in several games this year. She had the rest and was gone with the Brazilian national team. They should be fine taking on whatever 16 seed they get matched up with. Watching it on TV, they initially said that all of the girls that had been ejected on both sides were going to be ineligible for the the first round of the NCAA tournament, and people are kind of jumping down the throats of the announcers for saying that, but it's an odd situation. They didn't have clarification on it, so they corrected it when they could. But we now know that Camila Cardoso will be the only one between the two sides that is not going to get to play in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I will say this. I'm surprised that Flau'jae Johnson did not get disqualified herself, because now she did get the flagrant, because, her action is kind of what started all this when you really think about it. Now, again, this was a game that was very chippy all the way through, and the refs, they let them play. There was a lot of physicality in that game well before, what happened 38 minutes roughly into it that divulged into this chaos. But, again, Flau'jae Johnson's the one that held Fulwiley to draw the foul, and she's the one that shoved Watkins, which instigated. And, look, I'm not condoning the action of shoving an opponent to the floor, but I understand what Camila Cardoso was trying to do, where she was trying to stand up for her teammate, and it ended up, obviously divulging into what it did. Like I said, I'm surprised Flau'jae Johnson herself did not end up getting, disqualified from this game too, being that she's the one that ultimately instigated exactly what happened, that caused all the chaos, there at the end of the game. And again, her freaking brother ends up jumping over the scorer's table. What he was going to do on the court, I don't know. I do think it's a little bit funny that once he got out there and realized that Camila Cardoso was much taller than him, he quickly seemed to be advising to be held back, and obviously security grabbed him. They took him off in handcuffs. So what a whirlwind of emotions for the Johnson family. I know her mom was sitting right there next to him, and I think maybe another brother or friend, whatever it may be, because there was another person, this really didn't get talked about, another guy had also jumped the railing and was attempting to make his way onto the court. He was quickly grabbed by security and kind of pushed back over the railing, but Flau'jae Johnson's brother did make it onto the court, was obviously escorted away. I don't know what the process of getting him out of the jail under Bon Secours Wellness Arena is, but a chaotic scene nonetheless. And again, going back to my main point, it's unfortunate that what was a great game between two of the best programs in the country right now is only going to be remembered for this. And especially when you're talking about a game of women's basketball that is garnered so much attention, so much steam, and in very positive ways. You don't want to look at this as it being a black eye for it, in such a big game like this. But it certainly got a lot of attention, got a lot of people talking. I'll be interested to see what the ratings for this game are, and if they, maybe spiked after those final 2 minutes, or or something like that. But chaotic seed nonetheless. But again, at the end of the day, South Carolina is able to walk away with 79-72 victory. Just a weird way to celebrate, and I know Bill and Jen were talking about this as I was driving in. I don't understand the rule that ejectable players can't come back on the court to put on hats and take pictures with the trophies. That seems kind of dumb. Now, we typically don't see a lot of ejections in championship games, I guess, so it's not a rule that gets enforced a ton. But it is kind of one of those weird things where only 6 girls were out there able to actually celebrate. Now I can understand, like, all right, Cardoso got disqualified, fine. She can't come out there and take pictures and help cut down the net and all that kind of stuff. But the other girls who, again, were really, for the most part, just guilty of leaving the bench area, I feel like allowing them to come out there and celebrate wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, you know what I mean? But rules are rules. Again, it was just a weird situation overall, and you heard the full explanation from the head official there, and why it took 20 minutes to decipher all this. They had to look at film, and they had to figure out who was doing what, and who had left where, and who was on the court, and who was on the bench, and all that kind of stuff. It's just chaotic scene nonetheless, and again, is what's going to be remembered from this highly entertaining basketball game outside of that, as well. The coaches' reactions to this was interesting, to say the least. Kim Mulkey and Don Staley are two very bold personalities, and are loved and hated by a lot of people around the world of college basketball. But I want to play their individual reactions to what happened at the end of yesterday afternoon's game, and get y'all's reactions as well. Fire us up, text on 803-404-6100. If you want to weigh in on the Love Chevrolet phone lines, you certainly can. I will advise I am flying solo today, producing by myself, so if you want to make a phone call, do it during one of our commercial breaks, and I'll try and get you on as well as we navigate what was a crazy weekend on all fronts for Gamecock sports as the Extra Point rolls along. I'm Tyler Head along with you on this Monday morning here on The Game. Oh, it is a busy, busy month, and it's going to be a very, very busy Sunday over at Twin Peaks. It's St. Patrick's Day. If you're feeling lucky, wear some green into the lodge, and your Twin Peaks girl will bring you a free order of chips and queso in St. Patty's Day, and they certainly know how to party. That's valid at all participating locations, only with the qualifying purchase. Get to your favorite lodge for more details on that. It's also Selection Sunday. Get in there, and you can grab some free pickles when you fill out your bracket in person, and that's valid through the tournament just for showing up as well. So not only is it St. Patrick's Day, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself some food, but also Selection Sunday. Find out where South Carolina or your favorite team is going to be playing in the upcoming college basketball tournaments, all with our friends at Twin Peaks down in the Vista.
But I can tell you this, I wish she would have pushed Angel Reese. Don't push a kid. You 6'8", don't push somebody that little. That was uncalled for, in my opinion. Let those two girls that were jawing, let them go at it.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Oh, divulging into everything that went down in a chaotic SEC women's tournament final yesterday between South Carolina and LSU. The one and only Kim Mulkey giving her thoughts after everything that went down. Kim Mulkey is very easy to dislike. She is truly one of the villains of college sports. And I don't just say that from the perspective of, them going against South Carolina yesterday or anything like that. She's universally hated by a lot of people. She has a very prickly personality. She's not great with the media, and her responses to things can often raise an eyebrow. It's like, I don't know if that's the way I would have gone about looking at it. Which, by the way, having a villain is great for the sport. As somebody that's a big professional wrestling fan, you're so engaged because it gives you somebody to like and it gives you somebody to hate. And Kim Mulkey is certainly not afraid to wear the black hat in a lot of people's eyes for pretty much outside of Baton Rouge. I feel like a comment like that unnecessarily stirs the pot because it's not focusing on the matter at hand. Things got out of control on both sides. And again, it's kind of the tipping off point was what happened with Flau'jae Johnson. And I'm not condoning what Kamala Cardoso did. She shoved Flau'jae Johnson to the ground and got ejected, which is what I expected to happen because that is a pretty obvious, and they use the term fighting. It's not the same as throwing a punch necessarily, but it's treated equally because you are physically shoving somebody to the ground. But again, this all started from Flau'jae Johnson and her grabbing of Malaysia Fulwiley, and then again, Ashton Watkins coming over there, taking exception to that. She shoves Ashton Watkins, and Kamala Cardoso comes over and shoves her significantly harder than Flau'jae Johnson had shoved Ashton Watkins. This was not Kamala Cardoso just deciding to come over there and find a smaller player. Flau'jae Johnson is listed at 5'10". This wasn't Kamala Cardoso just saying, "Oh, there's a small player, let me shove her to the ground." This was her addressing the person that was at the center of the controversy going on. And I imagine if it was Angel Reese, she would have gone over there and probably done the the same thing. And I also don't think that Kim Mulkey should act like Angel Reese is completely innocent in all this either. Because if you remember earlier on in the game, she threw a pretty obvious elbow at Kamala Cardoso that was being discussed as possibly being a disqualifying foul for her as well. It ended up just being a normal foul. She was able to stay in the game, but she wasn't innocent in all this. And then again, this was a chippy game back and forth. Both sides, were getting very aggressive. And again, the refs let them play for the most part throughout a lot of the game, which, you can say that's the reason why this divulged into what it did there at the, there at the very end of the game. But regardless, very chippy fair between two very, very physical teams, as you would have expected. And again, everybody got their shots in at some point. I will say that much. And when the referees are allowing it to some degree, you're going to push that limit as far as you can and see what you can get away with. But I don't think anybody is innocent necessarily in what ended up happening yesterday. So that was Kim Mulkey's one of her many responses to this. I want to play Dawn Staley's because her response is very much a different tone.
Well, I mean, what you saw were two teams, highly competitive teams, try to win a conference championship, and they did not handle it well. Our players didn't, their players didn't, and it escalated. And I want to thank the officials and everybody that jumped in and just kind of calmed the situation down. And then the penalties were what they were. Like, they were well within the rules of ejecting the players that left the bench. even if they just stepped over the line of the bench. You have to sit there and keep your composure. But I'm going to say this. Fly J came to me right after the game, and she just apologized and said she's not that type of player. And I really appreciate that. It's just something that somebody won't ever hear if I didn't say anything. And she's not. She's a really good person. Things just got escalated. I'll take responsibility for what happened from our side of it, which is we don't, we talk about these things as a team, and we try to, as much as possible, express to them how not to react in those type of situations. But real time is real time, and I know that anybody, Camilla, as well as the other 4 or 5 players that were ejected, I know if they had a chance to do it all over again, they would do it differently. But now we have that. I just don't want the people who are tuning in to women's basketball see that and think, that is our game, because it isn't. Our game is a really beautiful thing. And to be quite honest, this is a part of it now. So we have to fix it, and we have to move on.
And she's right. Both teams assume blame in what happened, because, again, it was a result of both sides coming to blows, when it was all said and done. And I don't just say this because we're in Columbia, this is the home of the Gamecocks or anything like that, but that's a much more level-headed approach, and I feel like the right way to look at this situation with what Dawn Staley had to say, as opposed to Kim Mulkey saying, well, I wish we would have tried that with Angel Reese. I don't feel like that's the right way to look at it. And again, at the end of the day, it hurts everybody's reputation in some degree, which again, and she brings up the point for the game of women's basketball that has garnered a lot of steam and a lot of positive attention. This is something that's negative, though, that more people are talking about right now than, again, two of the best teams in the country that played a great game against each other. And then the other things that were going on in the world of women's basketball yesterday, the great comeback from, or the great second half from Caitlin Clark and leading Iowa to the overtime win against Nebraska. Great game in the ACC championship. Like, a lot of great things happened, but again, this is what's garnering most of the attention. And you certainly don't want to add fuel to the fire of people trying to paint your team as bullies or thugs or anything like that. Gino Ariema of UConn tried to do that last year after the game that South Carolina won in a very physical contest, and talking about his girls being bruised and all that kind of stuff. And Dawn Staley quickly and rightfully called him out on that BS and, tried her best to shut down that narrative. So, again, this is something else that will unfortunately kind of fan those flames a little bit, which is not what you want to see. Because, again, these are two great programs, the past 2 defending national champions, and 2 teams that play great basketball, physical style of basketball, but great basketball. But, again, this just unfortunately ends up overshadowing not only a great game, but what was a very highly entertaining tournament as well. And that's, kind of speaks to how big of a deal this was, that it's been 30 minutes and we haven't really delved into the actual basketball part of this. And, you talk about the headlines because they're the headlines, but, a lot of great and very interesting basketball occurred over the couple days there at the Bon Secours Wellness Arena. And this was such a hyped matchup that, again, fortunately, South Carolina was able to come out on top 79 to 72. But, it certainly looked like at points throughout the weekend that South Carolina may not even make it to this game. So I want to dive into the actual basketball element of everything that went down over the weekend coming up as we recap a wild weekend at the Bon Secours Wellness Arena for the SEC Women's Tournament. We'll dive into what happened on Friday and Saturday, because some very memorable things also went down then as well. We'll dive into that next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday morning here on The Game. Well, let me remind you once again about our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. I know you may not be always looking at your foundation's home, but it's something you should certainly keep an eye on, especially if you're noticing some issues or some problems that may be arising. Things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors and windows that might be a little bit sticky, uneven or bouncy floors, or cracks over your garage door. If you notice any of these problems, any of them at all, you could have serious foundation issues with your home. And with that, you need to check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantycanfixit.com. They'll send out a professional to analyze your home's foundation and get you fixed up so you and your family can live comfortably in your home for a long time to come. Again, Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantycanfixit.com.
Raven will trigger it in at midcourt. Got a catch and shoot here. 1.1 seconds to play. Gamecocks trail 73-71. To Camilla. Three-pointer for the win. Bang! Gamecocks win! Camilla Cardoso. A three-pointer at the buzzer. And the Gamecocks storm the floor. Camila Cardoso wins it. Her first three-pointer of the year. Unbelievable. And the Gamecocks are in the SEC Tournament Championship. Holy cow.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point Tower Head along with you on this Monday morning. That was the call on Saturday evening. Our guy Brad Muller, who I thought was having a heart attack listening to that call, it looked for a moment, there was a lot of doubt that South Carolina may not even make it to the SEC Women's Tournament Final as they were down by 2 in the waning seconds of that game against Tennessee in the semifinals. And Camila Cardoso, in the moment that I thought we'd all be talking about coming in here on Monday morning, ends up sinking her first 3 of her South Carolina career in a buzzer-beating shot to take the victory over Tennessee and maybe end up leading to Kelly Harper getting the boot up there in Knoxville as she was in tears as soon as that game ended for the ESPN immediately cut the camera over to her. What a crazy game that was. So many highs and lows. The way it started out with South Carolina just absolutely sprinting out to a massive lead, getting up 35-12 at one point. That looked like the blueprint for a blowout, right? We've seen this story so many times. South Carolina, scores 12 or 14 points before the other team even gets on the board. They're leading by, 20, 30 points at some point in the late in the second quarter, a huge halftime lead, and then they end up just running away with it in the second half. But that's not what happened here. While South Carolina got out to that huge lead, and maybe a lot of people went ahead and turned their TV off. Our guy Elijah Campbell, whose dad's a very big, Tennessee fan, said when it got to 35-12, he turned it off. He's like, I've seen all I need to see. If you've watched South Carolina women's basketball for any point of time, you know what is usually going to happen when they get out to that big of a lead. So imagine probably a lot of people turned it off. But Tennessee, and give them their credit, they slowly chipped away little by little, piece by piece as the second half of that game was going along. Rakia Jackson exploded in the third quarter of that game, and Tennessee controlled the fourth quarter of that one by shooting 61% from the field and doubling the rebounds that South Carolina had in the fourth quarter of that game, 10-5. And then Camila Cardoso in a situation where, and I know a lot of people were being critical of what Tennessee's defense was on that last play where they, basically were 10 feet away from Camila Cardoso when she shot that. There had to have been nothing on the scouting report of Camila Cardoso being the one to take a shot like that because she never has a South Carolina. I believe it was December of 2020 when she last attempted a three-pointer all the way back at Syracuse. Like, it's just not something that she does. And yes, with 1.1 seconds to go, there's only so much time, but she took matters into her own hands, put up a prayer, and ends up coming up with a shot that people are going to remember for a very long time. It's kind of one of those, you're going to remember where you were when that moment happened, and what it ultimately meant for the program. And hopefully we're talking about a team that wins a national championship here in a couple weeks' time. And while that game, if losing that game would not have derailed South Carolina from winning the national championship, they still would have been a number 1 overall seed, still would have been the same place in the tournament and all that kind of stuff. But when you talk about momentum, especially in a game like that where South Carolina faced its biggest adversity of the season and was still able to find a way to win, I feel like that goes a long, long way. Let's rewind back to Friday, the first game that South Carolina played, taking on Texas A&M, a team that South Carolina handled by 30-some-odd points earlier on in the season. They looked uncharacteristically sloppy, especially coming out of the gate. 10 turnovers in the first quarter of that game and 24 on the game. Thankfully, Texas A&M was not able to capitalize on those turnovers nearly as much as they should have, and South Carolina was able to pick up that victory. But it's a team that has been tested so rarely this season. You had the LSU game, you had the North Carolina game, you had the past 2 games against Tennessee in the regular season where they did make things interesting in the second half of those games. But to do it in back-to-back games is something certainly that we were not expecting, or excuse me, all 3 games for South Carolina this weekend is certainly something that we were not necessarily expecting, but it's something that you hopefully can build off of. And here's Dawn Staley talking about her team learning from playing these tight games this weekend.
I mean, they're pretty poised. They feel like their competitiveness goes to another level. You know, when a game gets close, and they don't panic. I think a lot of it is just how close they are. They don't want to let each other down. They don't. They hold each other accountable. Like, this is probably the team that holds each other more accountable than any team that I've been around. And maybe that's the trick, is that some of the things that we're addressing in a timeout, they've already addressed on the court. So they're already talking about what happened out there on the way back to the bench. So it's pretty cool to see the closeness of this group, and this group really just getting each other. And they also will definitely encourage, and they surely would, have multiple conversations about something they did that deserves a highlight or a pat on the back. They do that a lot as well.
And when you're a team like South Carolina that's lone undefeated in the entire country and have only had one loss as a team over the past 2 seasons, that being that Iowa loss in the Final Four, there is kind of that worry that you can get to the point of feeling like you're invincible, especially when you haven't been tested a whole lot during the regular season. And, we've talked about it that, if South Carolina were to have lost a game, it would be kind of that wake-up call to say, hey, guess what? We're not invincible. We got to look ourselves in the mirror, figure out what we did wrong, and improve on that going forward. And that's where, you could see them go on a tear, much like they did a couple seasons ago after losing the SEC tournament final to Kentucky and then just running rampant through the NCAA tournament, winning the national championship. But what we saw this weekend was as close to losses as you could get without actually losing, and I feel like that'll serve the same purpose for this team to be able to say, hey, we were one less miracle shot away from not even making it to the tournament final up there in Greenville. And, that will serve likely as that wake-up call they need. And they got some days off, some days to rest before Selection Sunday comes up, and then finding out where and who exactly they're going to be playing in the opening round of the NCAA tournament. I fully expect this team to come out with their hair on fire and hopefully make a nice run through the tournament and, get that national championship that they were just fingertips away from having the chance to play for, a season ago, but ultimately did not decide to get there. Another thing to take away from this weekend is the young talent that stepped up. We're getting ready to see a lot of these girls play in their first ever NCAA tournament, and the freshmen really shined, as they have all season, but especially over the course of the past couple of days, namely Tessa Johnson, who got 13 points against Texas A&M, which ties her best against an SEC team. She was 6 of 7 from the free throw line and got a block and one to end a 5-0 run for A&M early on in that fourth quarter when it seemed like the momentum was kind of shifting in their direction. She played a big role on defense against Tennessee as well. Malaysia Fulwiley, who we've talked about all season long and how special she is, showed up once again this past weekend. Red hot in the first half against Tennessee with 9 points and ended up scoring 24 points, including making 4 3-pointers against LSU yesterday. And that's just to name a few. They're not the only ones that stepped up big, but just a couple to highlight from the course of the course of the weekend. And when you talk about not just what they're going to be able to do this year, but looking ahead to next year and years down the line, that early young group of talent is, likely going to continue to sustain this success for years and years to come with the impact they're already showing as true freshmen. So that's exciting to see. Obviously, very encouraging for the program. And, it took everybody. It took every ounce of what everybody had to win these games because there were no gimmies. There were no easy games. The A&M game was the biggest margin of victory, but that's one that South Carolina still had to fight for tooth and nail because, again, they just turned the ball over quite a bit in that game, which they did ultimately clean up as the course of the weekend went along. But, again, hopefully this serves as that motivating tactic heading into the NCAA women's tournament. We'll get your reactions from the Firehouse Subs text line to wrap up the hour coming up. Quick reminder about all the ways you can check us out here on the game. Of course, have 107.5 The Game in Columbia, 100.3 The Game in Myrtle Beach, 100.5 The Game out in Florence. You can also listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app. Just go to your respective app store, give it a download, take us with you wherever you go. And, of course, you can always watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends at Shepherd's Glass as well. Just go to youtube.com, search Game TV, and watch us all day long. Going to get your reactions on the Firehouse Subs text line to everything that went down this weekend. Coming up to wrap up hour number 1 of the Extra Point is Tyler Head along with you on this Monday here on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday morning, reacting to a chaotic weekend at the SEC Women's Tournament up there in Greenville. A lot of you weighing in this morning on the Firehouse Subs text line. I'll try and get to as many of these as I can. Bob asks, besides Cardoso, who won't play in the first round of the NCAA tournament? Again, to clarify, I don't know if you were watching this game on TV, they did cause a lot of confusion where after the initial penalties were announced, or fouls were announced, they said that everybody that was ejected would not be eligible for the first round of the NCAA tournament. That is not correct. Camila Cardoso being the only player between the two teams to get disqualified is actually the only one that will not be eligible for the tournament. Again, I think Flau'jae Johnson should have been disqualified too. That didn't end up happening. But if she had been, she would also not be eligible. But everybody that got ejected, that was just for the remainder of the game on Sunday. And again, they weren't even allowed to come out there for the celebration and stuff, which I thought was silly. But everybody, with the exception of Camila Cardoso, will be able to come back for the first round of the NCAA tournament against whatever 16 seed that South Carolina ends up playing, which, again, that shouldn't concern you with Cardoso being out. It's funny almost that, we've talked about in those games that South Carolina played with her being gone for the Brazilian national team, as well as the games that she was able to sit out and rest because of just how chaotic her schedule was and, the fatigue of flights and all that kind of stuff towards the end of the regular season. We phrased it as, hey, here's your opportunity to see what you have without your best player. Should she get hurt? Should she get in foul trouble? Or, as we weren't necessarily expecting, she'll get disqualified for one of the games in the NCAA tournament. So, again, South Carolina should be fine against whatever, again, low seed that they end up playing. And you'll get Cardoso back for the second round game in the round of 32. Couple more here. And I had a few of you weighing in as well. I talked about Angel Reese, with Mulkey's comments about Cardoso wouldn't have done that to Angel Reese or whatever it may be. I forgot to mention, I actually had this wrote down and I skipped over it, but I believe it was Angel Reese as well that pulled Cardoso's hair in the process of, I think, grabbing a rebound earlier in the game as well. So a lot of chippiness between both these teams. And again, Angel Reese was certainly not exempt from her role in what was a very chippy game between both teams here. Nameless Texter weighs in and says, how proud do you think we should all be of the hair pulling, taunting, talking, and lack of emotional discipline on display yesterday? It's not something you should be proud of. Again, it's a game that ended up becoming a lot of that and was very chippy from the beginning, but that's not what you want to hang your hat on. And again, I thought Dawn Staley's comments about both teams being at blame was very spot on. And that's not the reputation that you want to build. South Carolina as a program, and LSU too, and give them their credit. They are a great team, a great program, won the national championship a season ago. These are two programs that don't have to resort to these kind of tactics to win games. They are better than 90% of the teams, 95% of the teams, for being honest, that they end up going up against anyway. They don't have to, take part in these tactics to gain an edge or gain an advantage. They just have the talent on both sides to be able to win more often than not. And now when you get them together, and again, two physical teams that are going to be fighting for rebounds because they're both really good at that kind of thing, there's going to be a lot of chippiness. And, I can speak to this from the perspective of somebody that used to wrestle in high school, that, when you have an official that is either not calling things very tightly or can't see certain things, you're going to push the limits of what you can get away with. And you're going to throw elbows. You're going to try and, hit somebody in the stomach or something like that and see what you can get away with. Now, again, if they start locking things down and enforcing it really hard, then that kind of brings that level down quite a bit. But, again, they let them play, which, give them credit in some regards, but you also run the risk of these kind of things happening towards the end of the game. But it's one of those things that you hope both sides can learn from it. Again, these are two teams that could see each other at some point in the tournament, for all we know, depending on how the brackets, end up working out and how both teams are able to make their way through. And the fact that Camila Cardoso is the only one that gets disqualified. I think alleviates a lot of concern that both these sides would have had they been down to, in South Carolina's case, 6 players, and then in LSU's case, 5 players getting set for their first round games of the NCAA tournament. But again, this is a topic that we're going to continue to visit all day long. More reactions to it. Elijah Campbell's supposed to jump in here with me at 10:30. He was there to witness it all in person. We'll get his thoughts and his accounts. But there were other teams in action this weekend, the men's basketball team and the baseball team, just to name a few. And we do need to shine a spotlight on them as well and what they were able to do this past weekend, because a lot of positive things coming away from this weekend for Gamecock sports. We'll dive into that and everything else that happened over the weekend for the Gamecocks as the Extra Point rolls along. For hour number 2, it is Tyler Head along with you on this Monday, Reaction Monday, I guess is the best way to phrase it, because plenty of things happened over the course of the weekend. And again, we'll react to it all as the day continues along. But hour number 2 of the Extra Point coming up next. We're going to have Jack Veltri calling in at 10:15, going to have Elijah Campbell jumping in at 10:30 as we look back on everything that happened over the course of the weekend for the Gamecocks. 10 o'clock, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you on this Monday morning, reacting to a full weekend of Gamecock sports. Of course, the women dominated the headlines with, everything going on up the road in Greenville, but we did have men's basketball as well as baseball going on too. And quick shout out before I get into that, did have somebody hit me on Twitter to remind me as well. The Gamecock hockey team also won the national championship this past weekend, so congratulations to them. I know that was one thing when I got here to South Carolina. I did not realize the huge following that a hockey team would have in a place like Columbia, but a very big deal, and congrats to them on winning the national championship over the weekend. Men's basketball headed out on the road Saturday to take on Mississippi State, looking to rebound on that. It's a tough loss, certainly, because you were that close to having an opportunity to put yourself in position to lay claim to at least part of the SEC regular season crown. You didn't win against what is legitimately one of the best 4 teams in the entire country in Tennessee, and because of that, South Carolina did not control their destiny going into the weekend. And funny enough, they were actually cheering for Tennessee to beat Kentucky on Saturday, because that would help South Carolina's cause in getting one of those, coveted double buys. But, that's something that was out of their control. Their focus was going into Starkville and beating Mississippi State for the second time this season. Funny enough, they started off conference play with them, and that ended up being, in the first game, as expected, very physical. On the lowest scoring side, South Carolina wins that 68-62. We expected much of the same this past weekend in Starkville, and it was a very much physical game. And South Carolina, maybe we weren't expecting to be tied 77 all at the end of regulation, but South Carolina ends up coming away with the victory in overtime, 93-89. And I go back to something that we talk about a lot, and that is the ability for this team to spread the responsibility and spread the contributions around. And that's exactly what they were able to do on Saturday. Didn't mean it wasn't a stressful game. Again, anytime you go into overtime, especially in a game like that with, high stakes of South Carolina wanting to wrap up the regular season, with the win and garner a lot of momentum going into the NCAA tournament, that's going to wear on the coach a little bit. And Coach Pierce, after the game, was certainly, talking about how much that game may have aged him a little bit.
Man, these guys, I just don't even know what to say. I aged. I literally aged in that one. But, we try to give the fans what they want. A little extra drama, a little overtime love, some suspense. And then, the good guys came out on top. But, yeah, obviously some situations that we didn't handle great the way that we should have in terms of execution. But, a lot of good teams have come in here and lost.
Yes.
And so we avoided adding our name to that list there. And it just was cool that there were so many other things, most regular season wins in program history that's special.
And he's right. Going into the hump is certainly not an easy place to play, and South Carolina was able to come away with that 4-point victory in overtime there against Mississippi State. But, you look across the board at what the level of production was from the 5 starters on Saturday. 4 of them end up scoring in double figures. Colin Murray-Bowles with 19, B.J. Mack with 25, Zach Davis with 13, Michie Johnson with 16. Talon Cooper did score 7 points himself, while also having 5 assists. So, again, it's something that we talk about so much with this team, where there's no one definitive superstar. They are some of all the parts, and sometimes it's one player stepping up, sometimes it's 2 players stepping up, but, you never look at it and say, oh, no, Michie Johnson didn't have a good game. That means the team lost by, 15 or 20 points or something like that. There's always somebody to step up, and in a situation like what happened on Saturday, we had this tight battle with Mississippi State, basically two teams staying lockstep with each other throughout the entire game. You needed all of your great players to be able to step up and have good games, and that's exactly what happened. What happened on Saturday. What can we say about Colin Murray-Bowles that hasn't already been said? This dude just continues to get better, and you look at him as certainly a bright spot for the future of this program, and goes out there on Saturday, scores those 19 points, as I mentioned, grabs 8 rebounds, has a incredible highlight block. I don't know if that made the SportsCenter top 10, but it should have. And with those 19 points is 9 of 10 shooting from the field. Like, just an incredibly efficient game for Colin Murray Boyles. Somebody who, again, I just feel like we talk about having his best game each and every time he goes out there, it feels like. And as a true freshman, that certainly excites you for, what the future of him and this program are going to be for years and years to come. Team was also 20 of 24 from the free throw line. BJ Mack made a couple of clutch free throws at the end of that game, and that's going to be very, very huge in the postseason, not only in the SEC tournament, but also in the NCAA tournament as well, where you are anticipating that every game is going to be tight, and the margin for error is going to be razor thin, where making those free throws can end up being the deciding factor when it's all said and done. As Coach Paris mentioned there at the end of the little sound clip, best regular season in program history with 25 wins. Not bad for a team that was expected to finish 13th or 14th, depending on who you ask, in the SEC standings prior to the season. This team deserves all the praise that is headed its way, no matter what they do in the in the NCAA tournament or the SEC tournament coming up here in a couple days. You would like to see them obviously put together a couple wins, not only at the SEC but also at the NCAA to be able to cap off what has been a very, very exciting season. But even if nothing else happens past this point, it was a truly remarkable year, and shows the resiliency of this team to not listen to the outside noise and understand how good they are and go out there and execute on a game-in, game-out basis. Now, because Tennessee was not able to beat Kentucky on Saturday, that does relegate South Carolina to being the 5th seed in the NCAA tournament. So, unfortunately, they do not get the double bye. They, as of right now, are lined up to play on Thursday, right around 3 o'clock, 25 minutes roughly after the first game ends, which does tip off at noon there in Nashville, and they will take on the winner of either Arkansas or Vanderbilt, who do play in the first round games coming up on Wednesday evening. Flip side of things, baseball also in action this past weekend, taking on Longwood, the final non-conference series of the season before jumping into conference play next weekend against Ole Miss. Clean sweep. South Carolina outscored the Lancers 42-8, including 22 of those runs coming yesterday in a pretty thorough beatdown of Longwood out there at Founders Park. And look, we've talked about it throughout the entire non-conference slate so far. That's exactly how you should beat those kind of teams. Those are games that shouldn't be close. Those are games that you should be run-ruling teams. And while you can't always gleam and say, wow, this guy's setting up to have an amazing season because he hit 8 home runs over the course of, however many games against, weaker opponents, that does hopefully give you some insight into what this team's going to be this season. But we're going to learn a lot this weekend taking on Ole Miss. I do want to highlight some guys that did have some great weekends, though, because there were several of them. Cole Messina did go 5 of 9 with 5 RBIs and had a 2-home run performance on Saturday. Parker Nolan, the transfer from Vanderbilt, 4 of 12 on the weekend with 4 RBIs himself. Tyler Cossey, another transfer, a guy that crazy story for him, not even playing baseball a season ago and jumping in feet first and being able to contribute very well to the South Carolina season so far. 4 of 8 on the weekend, 6 RBIs, including 5 of those on Sunday, also with a home run as well. So, again, these guys performing at the level that they should be against opponents like this. Pitching was good for the most part. Again, all 3 wins. For the second week in a row, Eli Jones, going back to his start against Clemson, gives up 9 hits, but he's able to get himself out of several jams, and not end up surrendering inning runs over the course of his outing yesterday. Ty Good got his first start on Sunday. We talked about this going into the weekend that South Carolina had not named a Sunday starter. They went with Jones on Friday, SQ on Saturday, and then had TBA listed on Sunday, which gave them the option to pull Roman Kimball from the bullpen, or put Roman Kimball in the bullpen if they wanted to, or save him for Sunday if things ended up working out that way. Kimball ended up coming in on Saturday, only threw a third of an inning, surrendering 1 run with 2 walks and no strikeouts with no hits as well. So he was pulled pretty quickly there, which again set up for Ty Good to get his first career start here at South Carolina. Again, a guy that was CAA Pitcher of the Year at the College of Charleston a season ago. Somebody that's very capable, has shown you a lot of good flashes out of the bullpen as well. The stats don't look amazing. when you kind of look back at the game itself. 3 innings pitched, 4 hits, 4 runs, 4 runs scored, only 1 run earned, 1 walk, and 3 strikeouts. But again, you had a fielding error that ended up leading to those runs being put in position. He did give up 3 on homer, but again, not a terrible outing for Ty Good when it was all said and done. Bullpen was excellent on the weekend. This certainly seems like a strong point of the team that hopefully is going to translate over into conference play. Marlott comes in on Friday night, pitches 2 innings, no hits, and 2 strikeouts. Veach pretty lights out on Saturday, 2 2/3, 1 walk and 7 strikeouts. Gainey comes in, does what he's supposed to do in the final inning, giving up no runs and no hits. And then between McCreary, Pitzer, and Dean, they end up giving up a total of 3 hits over the course of the final 4 innings of work in that game, and totaling 7 strikeouts between those 3 guys. So again, bullpen looking good so far. Again, I always take it with a grain of salt because it is mid-major opponents, but hopefully that is at least giving them momentum going into this weekend, taking on Ole Miss, where we will really, really learn about where this team is and how that translates to what's going to be a very, very tough SEC, as it always is, once again this year in 2024. Jack Veltri was out there at Founders Park all weekend, also kept an eye on all things going on with basketball. We'll talk to him coming up about the men's regular season, as well as talk a little bit of baseball too, as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday here on The Game.
make them use some time. Jeffries throws the heave down court. Tolu Smith catches it, gives it off to Davis. His three is short. That one is tipped in the air. And for the 25th time this season, you can put Spurs on this one. In overtime, South Carolina defeats Mississippi State 93-89.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour ahead along with you on this Monday morning, recapping everything that happened in the world of Gamecock sports over the weekend. We'll bring in our guy, Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central, looking back on what happened out there in Starkville. Of course, that was a call from Derek Scott on the Gamecocks Radio Network. First of all, Jack, as always, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time this morning. It did take a little bit of extra effort, 5 more minutes of play there in overtime, but South Carolina was able to walk away with the 93-89 win and cap off a historic regular season, getting to that 25th win on the season.
Yeah, first off, thank you again for having me on. Always appreciate it. But, yeah, man, it took an extra 5 minutes, but they got it done. And, honestly, I thought they were going to get it done with, the final seconds of that in regulation after B.J. Mack had hit those free throws. But, of course, that's not how it played out. And got to give Mississippi State credit. They are a good team, and I definitely think they more – than likely should be an NCAA tournament team. I think that's a very good team over there in Starkville, and they gave South Carolina a real run for their money. And, this game was crazy. I think what really came down to it for me was the play of your forwards, right? B.J. Mack and Colin Murray-Boyles. With CMB specifically, he didn't start in the first game between these two teams back in early January. Came off the bench and played a little bit, but nothing crazy. And then B.J. Mack had struggled mightily in that game. So for them to go out and score 25 points from Mack and then 19 from CMB and play as well as they did, I think really speaks volumes about this team. And look, I mean, they continue to find a way. There's always something new that they do, and getting a win in overtime is the latest to cap off what was an incredible regular season.
You mentioned Colin Murray-Boyles, and we've talked about him so much when we do these weekly segments, but I feel like we come away from every game saying, wow, that was probably his best game of the season. And once again, probably saying the same thing come away from Saturday, not only scoring 19 points, but 90% shooting from the field, grabbing 8 rebounds total, 4 steals, and also had one very, very impressive block in the first half of that game as well. Like, again, this guy just continues to get better and better.
He's insane. Like you said, 9 of 10. I feel like that's a normal thing for him to do at this point. He's always in that range of only missing like a shot or two. And, I think we said it a long time ago was that if he gets his three-point shooting right, he's going to be unstoppable. I mean, he hasn't really taken many threes, but, I mean, look, that's like the only thing missing from his arsenal. He is he's incredible for this team. He doesn't play like a freshman either. He plays like a veteran, and it's showing as such. I think this team is nowhere near as good without his kind of play. That goes for a lot of guys on this team. It's not just CMB, but I mean he makes a noticeable difference out on the court.
Well, you mentioned he doesn't shoot the ball deep. According to Lamont Paris, they have that in their back pocket. I don't know when they're going to plan to break that out, but we're getting into tournament play now, so I figure now would be as good a time as any, right?
Hey, maybe it's like a Camila Cardoso situation where you need a three-point shot to win a game, and who else are you going to go to other than CMB? So, hey, anything's possible.
Absolutely. Looking ahead now, of course, South Carolina does miss out on the double by virtue of Kentucky being able to beat Tennessee on Saturday, and certainly that would have been great. You would have had the extra day of rest, would have had maybe a little bit more favorable matchup hopefully on Friday, but they're going to play on Thursday as a number 5 seed. They're going to get the winner of either Arkansas or Vanderbilt, and I feel like South Carolina, as they handle both those opponents in the regular season, should be in a good position against either one of those teams coming up on Thursday.
Absolutely. I think, look, South Carolina beat both those teams, Arkansas back in mid-January and Vanderbilt in what was actually a close game at one point. I think South Carolina was trailing to Vanderbilt. They were going into halftime of that game. And, it took a 47-point second-half performance to win by 15. So I think South Carolina, whoever they play, should take care of business. The one thing that kind of makes me feel different about this year compared to other SEC tournaments with the squad is that they have enough veterans and a good enough team to not lose day one in the tournament. Now, is it possible? Absolutely. Anything's possible in college basketball at this point. But I think this team is good enough to work through any issues in a game and come out on top in some way. And I think against a team, whoever they play, they should beat. And then you get a matchup with an Auburn squad that, look, I think that's a pretty good draw for South Carolina. I mean, if you were the 4 seed, you're more likely than not looking at playing Kentucky potentially. And I think that's a much tougher matchup for South Carolina. So, I mean, obviously you got to win this game first against the 12 or 13 seed, but I think it's a very favorable look moving forward.
And obviously, we would love to see South Carolina run the table in Nashville and walk away with the trophy when it's all said and done. But they're going into this weekend without a ton of pressure on their back. They seem to be pretty slotted in around a 5 seed for the upcoming NCAA tournament. And again, if you ended up winning the SEC tournament, maybe you can find your way into being a 4 or something like that. But for the most part, this weekend is going to be about building a lot of momentum going into the NCAA tournament, which that's a good place to be because there have been many, many years where South Carolina's only option was to go in there and win it all in Nashville, and they don't have to do that this year.
Yeah, it's kind of nice that they really don't have to do anything crazy to make it to the NCAA tournament because newsflash, I think they're going to get in. But anyway, yeah, I mean, look, I think you don't want to lose day one of the tournament. That's never a good sign. But at the same time, it's not going to kill South Carolina if that happens. However, I think they still feel that disrespect factor. Still talking to a few of the guys, over the last few weeks. It seems like, people are still counting them out and stuff like, oh, you guys have to go play Auburn. If you win against the 12 or 13 seed, you guys won't stand a chance there. I think they still hear that sort of noise.
Sure.
And some of those that it's fuel to the fire. And it's, look, I think South Carolina still has a lot to prove. I think, ultimately you want to beat the best in the SEC to get yourself ready for March Madness where, you can play literally anyone and anything possible can happen. So this is a great prelude to getting yourself ready for what's to come as the NCAA tournament begins next weekend.
Well, the benefit if you end up beating either Arkansas or Vanderbilt in their first round or in the first matchup that they have, you don't have to play Auburn in Auburn. You're playing them in Nashville, which is a much, much different deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that game at Auburn a few weeks ago was like it's like a bad memory, to say the least. It's just you lost by 40 points. Auburn was hitting every single shot. They scored more than 50 points in each half, and they shot more than 60% from the field the entire game. I hate to say it, and maybe if I'm wrong, I'll eat my words. I don't care. But there's no way that they can do that again. I don't know. But, just a team shooting that well on that night, that's something you rarely see. And I think South Carolina is going to learn from that game, going to go back to the drawing board and make some changes. And look, like you said, this game is not at Auburn. That's a huge difference, in my opinion. Yeah, is Auburn a good shooting team? Are they a great team in general? Absolutely. But there's something different about playing on your home floor, at home, tough environment versus you're playing at a neutral site with, in the afternoon with who knows how many fans are going to be there. But, if South Carolina does play Auburn again, I do expect it to be a lot closer. Not saying South Carolina's going to win, but I do feel like it's at least going to be a more competitive game. And who knows what happens.
And hopefully there's still a lot more basketball to be talked about over the next couple of weeks with this team. But I don't think it should be glossed over how historic this season has been. Again, best regular season in program history for a team that wasn't expected to do much of anything by really anybody going into the season, and to come away with 25 wins. Really had to earn the last one there at Starkville on Saturday, but just truly a reflection of what an incredible year it's been so far.
Absolutely, and like you said, no win has been a gimme for South Carolina. Every win feels like it's been earned in a hard-fought kind of game, and that's honestly a good thing because you don't ever want handouts or anything, or whatever the case might be. But I think South Carolina has to, they have to be gutsy and gritty in their wins and stuff, and find ways to get the job done. We've seen this team make comebacks so many times and play better in the second half to ultimately secure a victory, and I think it's really going to serve them well as they go into the tournament, because we know more likely than not that they can make a comeback if it's necessary. But again, like you said, it's been a crazy, historic type of season. Picked last to finish in the SEC, and they finished tied for second. So there's nothing more you could say other than that.
Absolutely. Well, this time next week, we will know the destination and the opponent of South Carolina. Again, as you said, I think we can pretty comfortably say they're going to be in the NCAA tournament at this point in time. So, again, Selection Sunday coming up here this weekend. Then we'll know where they're playing and when, and see what the tournament has in store for these Gamecocks coming up. Appreciate it as always, Jack.
Thank you so much, man. I always appreciate it.
And Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central, and hopefully we have him on several more times over the course of the next couple months talking about a lot more basketball games for this South Carolina men's team. We'll jump back into the conversation about what happened with the women. Elijah Campbell set to join me here in studio in just a moment to give his accounts of what happened up there at Bon Secours Wellness Arena as he was there in person over the course of the entire weekend. Real quick, though, I want to remind you about the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway, as we are still waiting on that first Grand Slam from a Gamecocks hitter this season. But whenever it does happen, you want to make sure that you are registered online at 1075thegame.com for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Every game, $25 is added to the pot. Pot currently sitting at $425. So if somebody hits a Grand Slam coming up tomorrow night against Georgia State, you could be the lucky recipient of all that money. Again, go online to 1075thegame.com and register. Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. More conversation about what happened at the women's tournament final yesterday coming up on the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game.
players. It's all about the players being able to make plays on both sides of the basketball. You know, I just want to apologize to the basketball community. You know, when you're playing in championship games like this, in our league, things get heated. No bad intentions. They just try, their emotions got so far ahead of them that sometimes these things happen. So I want to apologize for us playing a part in that, because that's not who we are and that's not what we're about. But I'm happy for the players that were able to finish the game and get us another championship.
Welcome back into the Extra Points Out Ahead along with you here on your Monday morning. Of course, that was Don Staley after the game on Sunday, the 79-72 defeat of LSU in the SEC Women's Tournament Final. Of course, all the conversation was around what happened with a little over 2 minutes to go in the fight, melee, fracas. There's a lot of words we can use to describe what took place, but the entire sports world is buzzing about it. Our guy Elijah Campbell was on site to see this take place. Elijah, in a word, wow.
Yeah. In terms of picking, words to describe fights, I think my favorite is still Donnybrook.
Oh, that's a good. That's
Brouhaha's good. Fracas is one I used this morning.
Donnybrook, that's the Irish way of referring to it, I believe. It is St. Patrick's Day week, so it seems apropos.
It was that was a word I had to learn my senior year of high school in English lit. So that was one that stuck with me at all times. So when I get a chance to use Donnybrook, I like to throw that one out there.
Well, it was certainly all those things rolled into one. Give us your perspective on where you were and how you saw this take place.
So where I was sitting was right in front of the South Carolina bench, but opposite side. And I'm sitting towards the end, and I see Malaysia get the steal, and I see the foul from Flage, which I want to refrain from calling it a hard foul, unnecessary, clearly an intentional foul.
It was aggressive.
Yeah, clearly an intentional foul. Just basically holding her back, and there's some danger to that, naturally. But harder fouls occurred in that game, called and uncalled.
Oh, yeah.
That happened, and as soon as I see Bree chatting pretty aggressively towards Flage, walking past her, then I see Ashlyn kind of getting fired up, and I see the little forearm to Ashlyn, and I kind of I don't stand up, but I kind of cock my head a little bit, and before I can even fathom what that just happened there is when I see Camilla come in, and next thing we know, Flage is on the ground, and I see her brother. That's one of the first things I noticed. I was like, that guy's not a member of the team. There's some guy that stormed the court.
The guy in Dodgers hat and I think a jean jacket.
And a black Dodgers hat too, which does not make sense.
I was like, I don't think he's supposed to be out there.
No, absolutely not. And then I saw what was happening behind the scores table.
There's other people.
There were two other people that were trying to make a rush to the court too. And shout out to that security guard who is not getting paid anywhere near enough to handle that. Basically earn a Remington trophy in one day of work, keeping those big dudes off the floor, because one guy made it past, but there were two others that were efforting.
I think the second one was attempting to go over the scores table. I don't know if he grabbed him by the belt or got him by the waist, but he yanked him back, and they quickly pushed him back over. Quite a moment for the Johnson family, to say the least.
Yeah, in not a good way. But considering, that's the unfortunate thing, too, is that there was a lot going on with this game. And Flage, from the perimeter, was having a solid game.
Sure.
Nobody from LSU was having a good game inside the three-point line. But honestly, her and Anissa Moro's three-point shooting was, one of the reasons they were even in that game to begin with. And she was having a really solid afternoon, and it's all going to be overshadowed because she commits a hard foul, gets sent to the floor by Camilla, and then her brother gets on the floor. And look, if you're gonna rush the floor, I have a plan. What were you gonna do? It's not like he didn't know Camilla Cardoso is 6'7", because it did look like he got on the floor and was like, "Oh, I don't want any part of this." You knew she's 6'7".
Sure,
it's in the program. It's all. I mean, you've seen her play this year. You know she's a little bit bigger than you. And what are you going to do, lay hands on a woman when you get on the floor anyway? There was a whole lot of Leroy Jenkins going on here in terms of somebody getting on the floor and having zero idea what they were going to do once they got there.
It's kind of one of those things. It's a heat of the moment reaction to seeing your sister getting shoved down and, not really having that plan and getting out of there and kind of quickly realizing, oh, crap, I think I've screwed up.
Yep.
And he was quickly ushered away. I don't know if they have a small jail cell underneath Bon Scores Wellness Arena, but I imagine the mother have probably had to do some work after the game of getting him out and getting all that kind of stuff squared away. In addition to seeing her daughter be part, was Flage one of the ones she got ejected.
I think she stayed in.
She was on the court. That's right.
Yeah.
She was on the court. Now, that was the debate for me because Cardoso got disqualified, which now means she can't play in the first round of the NCAA tournament, which they're going to be fine. They played without her. Shouldn't be a problem. Initially, we thought it was going to be a 6-woman team in the first round and a 5-woman team for LSU because TV was misleading us to think that was the case. We ended up finding out after the game that was not the case. But what was the mass confusion like inside the arena as all this was taking place?
The wild things, I'm sitting with a couple of other media members on Media Row, and we're discussing, what's going to be called. An intentional foul on Flage is going to be called. Like a flagrant 2 ejection on Camilla is going to be called.
Flage could have gotten disqualified herself. And she would not have been shocked.
Because of her shove on Ashland's was unwarranted, too. You could have easily tacked on a technical there, too.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was taking so long. I mean, shout out to Alan Cole from Gamecocks Scoop for timing the video replay review. It was 18 minutes long.
Sounds about right.
And I remember sitting here, I was like, look, we've watched this replay ad nauseum. We have monitors on Media Row. We've watched this replay ad nauseum. I think we've already figured out the punishments. No one thought about the bench rule. But also, here's why this is a stupid rule. I get the spirit of it.
Sure.
Because what you don't want is like the malice at the palace and having that, frequently happening. I get the nature of the rule, but look, it was a dead ball when this all happened. The timeout has been called. Players are walking to their bench. You know what benches do when timeouts are called? They stand up.
They come out.
And they come out onto the floor.
Yep.
This was like any other timeout. Dawn Staley was walking over to congratulate Malaysia, give her a pat on the back, and her teammates were getting up as well. And this all happened as a timeout was called, and because they're getting ready to review it.
Sure.
And that's when everything happened. Players were naturally already standing up. Like the benches were already standing up. So disqualifying them for being on the floor past the coach's box, none of them got involved. Nobody touched anybody.
It's that line in the sand of if you leave the area at all, then that's it.
An absolute technicality. And then ultimately at the end of the game, they weren't allowed to come back out on the floor to celebrate with their teammates, leaving only 6 people out there, which is an embarrassing look for the SEC.
And it's one of those things like we don't typically see these kind of things happen in championship game situations. So I don't know if it's ever been put in that position before. And all right, if you want to say Cardoso, fine. She got disqualified. She can't come out.
That's fine.
I get that. She's not going to be in the first round of the tournament, sure. But the other girls that were just on the bench and there was no fisticuffs. They're just, hey, they walked out onto the court. That's silly. Give him a hat. Let him take a picture with the trophy. All that stuff.
Let him be out. Yeah, I get it. Like the Camilla's one thing, because what Camilla did, if I just did to anybody walking in this building right now, I might get arrested for.
Sure. Sure.
If someone chose to file an assault charge on me for doing that, they'd be within their legal right. So I get not allowing Camilla out, but not allowing Tessa Johnson, Chloe Kitts, Sakima Walker, the crew that got booted from the game, I thought was downright absurd.
Yeah,
I thought that was just an embarrassing look. Greg Sankey, with the drop of a hat, he's the commissioner.
Right.
If he says, okay, let's let these girls out, they didn't put a hand on anybody, he has the power to do that because you're Greg Sankey, and he just chose not to. I would like to hear an explanation as to why, but I think that's a pretty bad look on his part to have a 6-woman team on the podium accepting the trophy that he is handing out, and for a conference that cares so much about optics.
I was going to say, he's
neglected optics in that moment.
He's your buddy. You couldn't have said, Greg, come on.
We sat next to each other a couple days in this tournament. I could have been like, Greg, maybe I should have pulled a power move. Like, hey, buddy, let's think a little bit. Let's
use our head here.
Let's compromise. We will keep Camilla in the locker room, and we'll send the others out. The ones who didn't lay hands on somebody.
It's going to be a conversation we're having all day long. You and Jay will dive into it from 3 to 6 on the post game show. But you had the best seat in the house out of all of us for this one.
Oh man, that was an experience. I've covered conference tournaments before, but if you just told me with no context that I would get a Tessa Johnson block shot, a Tessa Johnson contested offensive rebound putback, and a Tessa Johnson ejection in one tournament, I would have said you're lying. If I would have said you'd also see a Camilla Cardoso 3 at the buzzer, I would say you're lying. A hair pulling incident, I would say you're lying. I honestly did not foresee any of the madness that eventually ensued.
March Madness, man. March Madness.
Taking on a new meaning.
Come back and wrap up today's edition of the Extra Point. Get some of your thoughts on the Firehouse Subs text line, 834-46100, right here on the Game.
But I can tell you this. I wish she would have pushed Angel Reese. Don't push a kid. You 6'8", don't push somebody that little. That was uncalled for, in my opinion. Let those two girls that were jawing, let them go at it.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head, Elijah Campbell hanging out for a few minutes here, recapping everything that he saw at Bon Secours Wellness Arena. That, of course, was the one and only Kim Mulkey giving some of her thoughts after the game. Apparently, she thought that if it was Angel Reese that got shoved instead of Flau'jae Johnson, things would have gone a little bit differently. Now, Angel Reese is not innocent by any means, as she threw an elbow earlier in the game. She also pulled Cardoso's hair on one of the rebounds as well. The elbow got called. Hair pulling did not get called, I don't believe. A lot of chippiness there. But, you know, out of everything that happened here, I don't know why that would be your answer, your reaction to this. Like, I thought Dawn Staley, and I played it earlier, was like, hey, look, we're both to blame. Chippy game. A lot of us were doing things we probably shouldn't have been doing. It's a blame on both teams. Not like, well, if she'd been fighting my biggest player, then we're telling a different story. You're like, why?
Well, it makes you think, how do you view Angel Reese, Kim? Do you view her as a team bodyguard? What do you think she's here for? She's here to play basketball. She's not like your enforcer.
And here's the thing,
hockey buddy.
If her and Cardoso start throwing hands, guess what? They both get disqualified. Now she's out for your first round game. Do you want that necessarily? Probably not.
Do you want your best player involved in that? Absolutely not. You should actually commend her for what she did by just walking away. And that's what, you know, more people in the situation should have done, was just walk away. And I think it is wild to see the stark contrasts of how these coaches handled this afterwards. Dawn Staley took time out of her celebration speech and trophy ceremony to say what happened was not okay.
Right.
There was a lot of accountability that was taken there, and as soon as Kim Mulkey had a chance, she's like, well, I want my biggest player to fight their biggest player. She's like, let the little ones go at it. Like, you still want them to fight, Kim? Is that what you wanted to? Would you have been happier? Would you have said that if Malaysia was the one who pushed Flau'jae?
Sure.
No, you would have found another reason to make yourself a victim of this and not take any accountability for the behavior that happened between both teams that day. That's exactly how that would have gone.
I know you were out there doing the trophy ceremony. I'm glad you were not in her press conference to get chastised, as she does to every media person. I know you didn't get to see this, and I forget the name of the courtside reporter for ESPN, but, you know, she asked a very valid question at the end of the first quarter about, you know, the physicality of the game, and she just tore into her, which I think was uncalled for. You know, I was thinking about this last night, hearing some of these comments, because Mulkey's just always so prickly with the media. You know, they talk about people having like their own personal hell, right?
Yeah.
I think Kim Mulkey's would be spending eternity in a room full of reporters, just having to answer questions for all of eternity.
Yes.
Because that seems to be like her least favorite place in the world, and I get it. Not every coach, like Dawn Staley doesn't love doing media, but she's at least like kind to people, and she doesn't fly off the handle, and cordial, and she doesn't fly off the handle with every question that asks. Like, Kim Mulkey just loses her mind about the simplest things.
Yeah, and Dawn understands like our jobs, right? Sure. Like, Alan Cole asked the question in the presser to Malaysia, like, what happened on the play of the fight? And Malaysia kind of looked at Dawn, and Dawn just goes, don't worry, I'll answer that. You know, whereas Kim Mulkey probably would have snapped. Would have snapped. I feel pretty good about making that leap too. She would have snapped on somebody. And you get it. You have to ask the question. Like when Angel Reese is not on the sideline for the first few games of the season.
You don't need to know that.
Yeah, you don't know that.
Literally one of the best players in the country. Your best player on this team, and she's just not around.
A superstar of the entire sport.
And it's just no big deal. Like, we need to know that,
We're
Kim.
not entitled to even ask. We just have to take your word for it because you're Kim Mulkey.
Ridiculous.
It quite frankly is absurd. And this is not very surprising either. And the question I remember that was asked with the sideline reporter was like, this is a very physical game. She goes, well, hasn't the whole tournament been physical? Well, yes, Kim, but you know what? This game is involving some hair pulling, flagrant fouls, ultimate trash talk, and a history between the two teams and no love being lost. That's a valid question. Don't be coy here, Kim. Like, she knows what she's doing, and she plays a certain role in the sport. She loves being the villain, and that's I think she's almost becoming more wrestling character than she is a basketball coach at times.
Well, she was dressed like Ric Flair yesterday, so that helped.
Yeah, exactly, and that's maybe what makes me draw that analogy so much easier is because she did dress like Ric Flair.
I'll say this: sports are a lot more fun when you have someone to hate, and I think the collective Gamecock audience has a strong dislike for Kim Mulkey, to say the least.
The conflict is beautiful. The conflict is why we do this.
Well, and here's the thing: it's not going to be the last matchup. They're going to see each other pretty much every single year in high-stakes games every single time. So this is only the beginning.
In some years, maybe twice.
Maybe so. Could see them again this year for a third time, for all we know, depending on how the NCAA tournament goes. But again, Elijah will give plenty of insight today from 3 until 6 on the post-game show with Jay on everything that he saw this weekend, not just the fight out there at the Bond Scores Wellness Arena. That'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Coming up next, Wes Mitchell jumps in for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.